Hey there, we're going to work on a sample problem for trade and comparative advantage. The type of problem you'll be most likely to encounter use the production possibility schedule. So here you have different combinations of sugar and pineapple that two countries, in this case Brazil and Chile, can produce. So you can see, for instance, Brazil could produce 500 million tons of sugar and 300 million tons of pineapple, or this combination, 1,500 million tons of sugar and 100 of pineapple. Same thing for Chile. Now you can be asked a question about absolute advantage. So what is absolute advantage? And in this case, which country has an absolute advantage? So to determine that, you need to look at how much each country can produce. So for Brazil, they could produce a maximum of 2,000 million tons of sugar, while Chile produces 600. So it appears here that Brazil is going to be more efficient at making sugar, and meaning it also uses fewer resources for each ton of sugar it produces. So in this case, Brazil would have an absolute advantage in producing sugar. If you look at pineapple and you look at how much each country produce, again, it looks like Brazil can produce more, therefore they're more efficient also at making pineapple than Chile. So in this case, Brazil would have the absolute advantage for both the pineapple and the sugar. It does not have to be that way, but it can happen. Now on to comparative advantage. Now comparative advantage is a slightly different concept. It looks at a relative efficiency rather than an absolute efficiency. And we use opportunity cost to determine who has a comparative advantage. So how do we calculate opportunity cost? Well, to determine opportunity cost, you have to look at what is given up, the cost of the opportunity. So, for instance, in this example, if Brazil wants to produce more sugar, they are at 500, they want to produce 1,000. They would gain 500, but when they do that, they're not able to produce the 300 pineapple. Now they can only produce 200. So they lose 100 pineapple. And for each ton of sugar that they add, they would give up 1/5 of a ton of sugar. And how do we get that number? You calculate the opportunity cost by looking at what you give up, and to put it on a unit basis so we can compare from one product to the other, you divide it by what you have gained. So the opportunity cost for sugar for Brazil is 1/5 or 0.2 tons of pineapple. If we do the same thing for Chile, you can see here that every time Chile adds 150 tons of sugar, they lose 50 tons of pineapple. So on a unit basis, for each additional ton of sugar, Chile would give up 1/3 of a ton of pineapple. A couple more examples. If you do calculate the opportunity cost for pineapple this time for Brazil, if Brazil wanted to add pineapple, so go from 200 to 300 and add 100, they would give up, and this is a negative sign, they would give up 500 tons of sugar to do so. So for each ton of pineapple, additional pineapple produced, Brazil gives up 5 tons of sugar. All right, and the last one. So for Chile this time, if they wanted to add 50 tons of pineapple, they would have to give up 150 tons of sugar, which means that for each additional pineapple produced, they give up 3 tons of sugar, 150 divided by 50. So if we summarize here, it would seem that Brazil is better at producing sugar. And you see for sugar, when you compare the opportunity cost of the two countries, Brazil has the lower one. When you look at pineapple and you compare the opportunity cost, you see this time that Chile has the lower opportunity cost for pineapple. The lower opportunity cost translate into a comparative advantage. All right. So in this case, Chile has a lower opportunity cost for pineapple, therefore has a comparative advantage for pineapple and should specialize in the pineapple. And the opposite is true for Brazil. Brazil has a lower opportunity cost for sugar, therefore has a comparative advantage for sugar and should specialize in sugar. The gains of trade. Now that we've figured out who has a comparative advantage in what and where each country should specialize, we can try to figure out how much they would gain from this, from the specialization and the trade. Right, so assuming that currently, before specialization, before trade, the two countries are producing these amounts of sugar and pineapple. When they specialize, how much can they gain? So the specialization would dictate that Brazil does sugar and they would be able to produce a maximum amount of 2,000. And if Chile does the pineapple, they could produce a maximum quantity of 200. So the gains would be going from 1950, which would be the 1,500 that Brazil was producing, plus the 450 million tons of sugar that Chile was producing. And after the specialization, you would have 2,000 produced by Brazil, which means that there was an extra production and some gains of 50,000. So 50,000 tons more sugar being produced. For the pineapple, Brazil used to produce 100, which you can see this amount here. Chile used to produce 50 over here. And now Chile by himself can produce the 200. So again, we gained 50 million tons of pineapple through this specialization. Terms of trade. Now we have to exchange the goods and services. Right now, Brazil has all the sugar and Chile has all the pineapples. But we know that both countries want sugar and pineapple. See, Brazil was making some sugar and pineapple as well as Chile. So they both want both products. So how do we exchange these two goods? What would be beneficial for each country? So we know from the opportunity cost that the cost of pineapple for Chile is 3 sugar. 3 million tons of sugar per pineapple. So when Chile is considering selling some pineapples to Brazil, they would not want to get less than 3 million tons of sugar per million tons of pineapple that they sell, because that's how much it costs them. On the other hand, when you think about Brazil, Brazil can produce the pineapple for 5 units of sugar. Therefore, they would not want to pay 5 or more, because then they could do it themselves. So a beneficial arrangement or terms of trade between those two countries would include a terms of trade or exchange rate that would be between 3 sugars for Brazil and 5 units of sugar for Brazil. So the terms of trade will be more than 3 units of sugar, but less than 5 units of sugar for every pineapple that would be exchanged. You could also express that same exchange rate from the sugar perspective. So 1 sugar could be exchanged for more than 1/5, but less than 1/3 of a pineapple. So let's see if we use terms of trade that fit this requirement. So we picked the terms of trade at 1 pineapple for 4 sugar. And so we compare the production before specialization. So we had 1,500 sugar from Brazil and 450 from Chile, 100 pineapples from Brazil, and 50 pineapples from Chile. After the specialization, Brazil produces 2,000 units of sugar, Chile 200 pineapple. Now we have to exchange. Trade needs to take place. All right, so Chile has 200 pineapple. We know they had 50. We know Brazil had 100 pineapples, so you would assume they would want at least that much. So we can decide that Brazil will want to buy 125 pineapple, which means there would be 75 left for Chile, which is beneficial for both. They both end up with more pineapple than before. So now, to pay for those 125 pineapples, Brazil is going to have to give up 4 sugar per unit of pineapple. So that 125 pineapple times 4 will give us 500, it's the 500 units of sugar. Okay. So Brazil will give 500 units of sugar to Chile to pay for the 125 pineapple. They will be left with 1,500 sugar themselves. So in the end, does this benefit both countries? Well, it does. They both end up with more pineapple, 25 additional pineapple each. Chile gains 50 units of sugar. Brazil does not gain any sugar with this terms of trade, but they do not lose any. So there's still some gains on both sides. If we had picked a different terms of trade, the gains might have been a little bit different. But in this example, you still have beneficial outcome for both countries.